What happened to me isn't just another HOA nightmare. It's a story about overreach, intimidation, and the moment power flips back to the one who's really in control. This happened right here in the United States. But I know stories like this are happening everywhere. So before we dive in, drop your city in the comments. If you've got a wild HOA story, you might see it featured next. Now, let's get into mine. It started on a Tuesday, 7:03 a.m., three loud bangs on my front door. Not knocks, bangs, fist against wood. Rhythmic, purposeful. I was in the middle of brewing coffee when I heard it. And when I say I froze, I don't mean out of fear. I mean out of habit. That knock. It wasn't casual. It wasn't from a neighbor or even someone delivering bad news. It was a dominance knock, the kind you hear in raids, standoffs, or when someone's trying to prove they're in charge. Only this time, they knocked on the wrong door. I'm not your average homeowner. I don't post in neighborhood forums. I don't argue over lawn heights. I don't even wave at the HOA board president when she passes by on her golf cart, because I don't need to be seen. I just need people to remember what happens when they step wrong. And unfortunately for them, they were about to find out. I live in a quiet suburb, dead-end street, family homes, 3-speed limit signs within 200 yards. On the surface, it looks like paradise. But if you've ever lived under an HOA, you know peace is usually skin-deep. And for the last 6 months, the HOA in my community, Brookhaven Trace, had been slowly turning into something else, something darker. They weren't just enforcing lawn regulations. They weren't just collecting fees. They were operating like a private police force. They handed out notices like warrants. They slapped compliance inspections on mailboxes without knocking. And most recently, they started showing up in black uniforms labeled HOA Patrol, looking more tactical than the actual neighborhood cops. At first, I ignored it. Chalked it up to another bored Karen on a power trip. But then they escalated. They started banging on doors at 6 a.m., demanding residents move vehicles from their own driveways. They towed a 76-year-old veteran's motorcycle while he was in the hospital, called it visual pollution. They fined a mother $500 for letting her toddler run barefoot on their own lawn. Biological hazard, they said, and then they came for me, not because I did anything wrong, but because I didn't respond, because I didn't bend, because I never gave them the satisfaction of fear. So they decided to test me, and they failed. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 men, both in black, tactical polos with HOA stitched in bold white lettering. One had a clipboard, the other had his arms crossed like he was waiting for backup. Behind them, parked at an angle like they were ready to blockade the driveway, was a black SUV with yellow lights blinking on top. Looked official, but I knew better. Real enforcement doesn't knock like that. I didn't open the door. I spoke clearly through it. Identify yourselves and state your business. The clipboard guy shifted like he didn't expect resistance. This is Brookhaven Trace Compliance Patrol. You've been cited for failure to respond to multiple violations. You are required to exit the premises and submit to inspection. Submit. To inspection. Like this was a military op, I stayed calm, reached for the chair in my hallway where I kept my jacket. It was black, tactical cut, breathable mesh interior, and on the back, 3 words stitched in bold yellow letters. FBI Tactical Unit. I didn't wear it for show. I didn't wear it for ego. I wore it because it came with 15 years of service, hundreds of raids, and a dozen citations for tactical command excellence. I was the guy people called when a breach got messy, and if these fools wanted to escalate, they were about to get the full education. But first, I needed to see what game they were playing. I'm not exiting without a warrant, I said. One of them scoffed. We don't need a warrant. HOA bylaws grant us authority over all structures and property modifications. And that includes my body. Silence. Then the second one spoke. Sir, non-compliance will be documented as an escalation. We are authorized to act under Community Directive Code 9B. I smiled. There was no Code 9B. Brookhaven Trace's entire HOA charter was 10 pages long. I'd memorized it after the first time they fined me for a non-regulation mailbox handle. Hold position, I said. I'll come out. I zipped up the jacket, slid open the front door, and stepped onto the porch like it was a tactical briefing room. The guy with the clipboard looked up and froze. His eyes locked on my chest. Then his gaze dropped to the back of my jacket as I turned slightly, FBI tactical unit shining in the morning sun. The other guy took half a step back, and that's when she arrived, Karen Worthington, president of the HOA. High heels clicking down the sidewalk like it was a courtroom, tan slacks, oversized sunglasses, and a tablet tucked under her arm like she was about to announce an indictment. "Agent Moore," she said, her voice sugary and false. "There's no need for all this tension. We simply need to inspect your exterior structures and confirm compliance." I didn't respond. I just turned slowly until I was facing her fully. She squinted at the badge stitched into my jacket. Then her mouth opened slightly. She blinked. And then she stumbled, literally. Tried to take a step back, missed the concrete edge of the walkway, and the clipboard guy had to catch her arm before she fell. One of the fake cops whispered something, probably telling her who I really was, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wasn't aware we had any federal presence in the neighborhood. I said nothing, just looked her dead in the eye. "You're about to find out what that means." Inside my head, I was already building the case. I had security footage, I had audio. I had witness statements from neighbors who'd been harassed. All I needed was one more mistake, one more moment where they crossed the line, and something told me. That moment was coming fast, because bullies don't back down when they get scared. They just look for new ways to push. The moment Karen saw the jacket, everything shifted. The clipboard guy lost his bark, the fake officer with arms crossed. He turned away like he suddenly had somewhere else to be, and Karen, she tried to reset the power dynamic like she was still in charge, but her eyes said it all. That jacket broke the illusion. Still, I wasn't there for a stare-down. I was there to finish what they started, and like I said, bullies don't retreat. They just reload. Karen brushed her blazer and forced a tight smile. "You'll find, Agent Moore, that the HOA operates within its own jurisdiction. We've spoken with counsel." I kept my tone calm. "Unless your counsel is with the Department of Justice, I don't care. Your mailbox light is out of compliance," she added, pretending not to hear me. "My badge is federal," I said. "Your clipboard isn't." She looked to the guy on her left. He nodded slightly, too rehearsed. They thought this was still salvageable. They thought I'd be another homeowner too scared to push back. They didn't realize I'd spent 15 years running tactical entries into drug dens, hostage houses, and weapon smuggling tunnels in Arizona. This was a cul-de-sac in khakis. They weren't ready. 3 hours later, I got the letter, hand-delivered, slipped under the door. No return address, but the HOA watermark was printed at the bottom in faint gray ink. "Final warning. Non-compliance violation 14B." The same fake code they mentioned earlier. I scanned it once. Then again. It wasn't just vague. It was illegal. It claimed I had obstructed an active compliance inspection, engaged in hostile behavior toward uniformed enforcement officers, and, get this, displayed unauthorized insignia causing fear and confusion among residents. That last part, that was about my jacket. They didn't just see the badge, they panicked about it. Karen wasn't trying to protect the community anymore. She was trying to protect her ego. And she knew the moment I stepped outside that morning, the balance of fear had shifted. They'd been unchecked for too long. So now. She wanted to make me the example. I pulled the clip from my door cam. The knock. The fake patrol. Karen's stumble. Then I grabbed footage from the week before. 2 men in black HOA polos harassing my neighbor, Mrs. Lindell, about driveway stains from her son's old truck. She was 82 and still recovering from hip surgery. They made her cry on her front porch. I saw the timestamp, 8:43 a.m. 15 minutes later, I was in my garage at my workbench, opening a secure case inside. My old tactical recorder, body cam, audio enhanced. Custom time sync with my home system. I clipped it on. No more denials. No more hearsay. Everything moving forward was going to be documented by the book, because if the HOA wanted to escalate, I'd go higher than they ever imagined. That evening, I walked the block. Neighbors waved. But their eyes looked past me. One woman mouthed "thank you" from behind her screen door. Another guy, middle-aged, t-shirt tucked into cargo shorts, waited until I passed before whispering, "They've been watching your house since last week." "Who?" I asked. He nodded across the street. "Karen's place, second-story blind slightly cracked, light on, no movement. I saw one of them take pictures of your truck," he added, "from inside a car." That was confirmation. They weren't just reacting, they were planning, coordinating. And I wasn't about to wait around for their next play. The next morning, I sent a formal notice to the HOA's listed email address. Subject line: Cease and desist unauthorized patrol and false citation practices. Body: I am a current federal tactical officer with the FBI. You are hereby instructed to cease all attempts to impersonate law enforcement, patrol public or private property under false pretenses, and issue citations unsupported by community bylaws. Any further intimidation, surveillance, or harassment will be documented and reported to state and federal authorities. All further communications should be routed through my legal representation or the FBI's Community Affairs Liaison. I signed it and attached 3 screenshots: Karen's face mid-stumble, the fake patrol SUV idling at the corner, the clipboard's violation form with the non-existent 14B code. I didn't expect a reply. But I didn't need one, because within 20 minutes, something else happened. My mailbox was tagged, not a sticker, a black envelope, taped with electrical tape, unlabeled inside, a single photo, my backyard, nighttime, blurry, taken through a chain-link gap. I checked my cams. Nothing. Whoever took it had stayed low, out of sight. There was no threat written on the back, just a question. Why do you think you're special? That's when I knew this wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was personal. By 10 p.m., I had everything in motion. 3 flash drives prepared, labeled, timestamped, sealed. One went to a trusted buddy in the Marshal Service, one into my gun safe, and one onto a drive I kept in the attic, hidden in a steel ammo box with nothing but old tax records and rusted-out wrenches. Because if they were watching me, I wanted them to see the obvious stuff. While I built the real case where they couldn't reach, that weekend I laid low, but the HOA didn't. Saturday morning they showed up again, not banging. This time it was calm, but rehearsed. 3 patrol members, matching black shirts, Karen trailing behind like she was supervising a raid. I watched from the upstairs window. They didn't come to my door. They stood at the edge of my lawn, pointing at the flower beds, whispering into radios that weren't connected to anything. Karen took photos. Clipboard guy scribbled notes. Then they walked away. No notice left. No fine taped up, just performance. But I knew what they were doing. It was documentation theater. They were trying to build a fake file, create the appearance of ongoing non-compliance. Because if they couldn't outpower me, they'd try to out-paperwork me. But I was 10 steps ahead. Because I'd seen this exact move in cartel turf wars and political shakeups. You don't need real crimes when you've got fake charges. And if Karen thought she was the first person to try and pin a case on a federal officer, she'd better sit down for what's coming next. Because I'd already filed a formal complaint, and I'd just received word back. A joint task force for suburban oversight was being formed, headed by a colleague of mine at DOJ, focused on civil overreach and private enforcement abuse. Guess whose neighborhood just made the shortlist? Well, before you start guessing, if you're enjoying this story and love such dramas, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, uncover more wild stories, and bring you even crazier content. Your support means everything. It's what keeps this channel going strong. And trust me, there's plenty more chaos coming your way. Back to the story. There's something I've learned after 2 decades in federal ops: the moment a bully stops making noise, that's when they're plotting something louder. After the stunt they pulled on Saturday, silently surveying my property like they were planning a tactical breach, the neighborhood went quiet. But it wasn't peace. It was strategy. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to frame me. And on Monday morning their next move landed, literally, in the form of a formal complaint, slipped into every mailbox on the block, including mine. A 7-page memo from the Brookhaven Trace HOA, addressed to all residents. Title: Ongoing Investigation. Concerning behavior and unauthorized use of law enforcement symbols. They never mentioned my name directly, but they didn't have to. The memo said a resident had displayed federal insignia in a manner designed to intimidate, refused lawful inspection of code violations, and presented an increased threat to neighborhood stability. They accused me of creating a culture of fear, of weaponizing silence. And then came the kicker. Out of an abundance of caution, we have notified municipal authorities of this situation and recommend all residents maintain distance from the property in question until resolution is reached. Translation: They were trying to isolate me, to make me look unstable, to turn my own neighbors against me, not through law, not through truth, but through fear. It was smart, cowardly but smart, because even if the city didn't act on the complaint, the damage would still be done. Neighbors would hesitate, friends would stop waving. Eyes would linger too long at the mailbox or not at all. But here's what Karen didn't know. I'd been documenting her every step, every patrol, every false citation, every photo taken on private property, and the morning her flyer hit mailboxes. That was the same morning I dropped a package of my own, straight into the hands of the DOJ Suburban Oversight Task Force. Inside the package, 2 weeks of home surveillance footage, a copy of Karen's fake compliance violation, forms 3 recorded conversations with neighbors who'd been harassed, audio from a patrol member admitting they had no actual authority, just instructions, the most damning clip. A camera I'd hidden in the corner of my garage window, capturing the moment one of the HOA patrol guys whispered to Karen, "He's FBI, like real FBI. I saw the badge." And Karen's reply, she didn't back off. She didn't de-escalate. She said, "Then we hit him harder, before he hits back." That line changed everything, because now this wasn't just neighborhood politics. This was targeted retaliation against a federal officer. 3 nights later I got the call, not from the DOJ, from a man I hadn't heard from in years. "More," he said. "You stirred a nest." I knew the voice. Agent Dunham, tactical advisor for the Federal Oversight and Integrity Division. "Karen Worthington's HOA is on a list," he said. "Top 5 most aggressive civilian-run associations in the Southeast. You just gave us the spark we needed." I leaned back in my chair. "So what happens next?" "Whatever you want," he said. That sentence hit different because I'd spent the last 2 weeks responding, strategizing, defending. But now I had leverage. The next morning Karen made her boldest move yet. She showed up to my driveway, alone, no patrol. No clipboard, just her. In a white blouse, oversized sunglasses, and a confident smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped onto the concrete like she owned it. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, jacket on, badge visible. Her smile flickered. "I think this has gone too far," she said. I didn't respond. She tilted her head, trying to read my silence. "The board has voted," she continued. "You've been placed on a 30-day probationary status." I raised an eyebrow. "Probation?" "Yes," she said. "Pending investigation of your behavior and presence of unauthorized equipment. This includes surveillance hardware and tactical gear. If you fail to comply, we'll pursue removal proceedings." That's when I laughed, quiet, controlled. The kind of laugh you learn after years of watching people walk themselves into handcuffs without realizing it. "You just admitted," I said, "to surveilling me, on record, without consent." Karen's face twitched. "This is your official notice," she said, backing up. "We'll be in touch." I took 1 step off the porch. "Karen," I said, stopping her mid-turn, "if you ever step on my property again without a warrant, I won't respond with a conversation." She swallowed, and for the first time since this started, she didn't speak. She just walked fast. That night, something felt off. I couldn't explain it. No knocks, no noise, no patrol, but still. My gut told me it wasn't over, so I checked the cameras. Nothing. Then I checked the sensors. Motion alert. Back gate. 3:16 a.m. I rewound the feed. There it was. A figure. Hooded. Tall. Gloved. He ducked past the motion zone, but just barely. In his hand, spray paint. I fast-forwarded. 4 minutes later, he was gone. I ran outside with a flashlight, and there it was, scrawled across the back of my garage wall. "You think this is over?" That was it. No HOA tag. No signature, just raw threat. And that's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to wait for oversight panels. I wasn't going to play politics. I was going to make this public. The following morning, I printed out everything. Still frames of the graffiti Karen's investigation, letter video transcripts of the fake officer, meetings, every email from the HOA with fake bylaws, a list of every neighbor who had come forward with their story. Then I uploaded it. Not to the city, not to the FBI, to the one place HOA dictators hate the most, Nextdoor. I posted it in the Brookhaven Trace community thread under a headline. "If you've been harassed by the HOA, read this." I didn't use emotion. I didn't call names. I let the footage speak. I let the timestamps speak, and they did. Within 6 hours, the post had over 100 comments. Within 12, People were knocking on my door, not to complain but to thank me. They told me things they'd been afraid to say for months. My son got a warning for aggressive sidewalk chalk. They fined me for having a veteran bumper sticker. Karen said my fence color was too urban. One after another, people came forward, because once someone stands up, everyone else remembers they're allowed to. By the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, tablet open, but no one sat, no one nodded. They stared, not in fear, in recognition, in awareness, the illusion of control gone. She tried to speak, but the moment she opened her mouth, someone interrupted. A man in the back, gray beard, U.S. Army cap. He pointed straight at her and said, "You tried to scare the wrong guy." And the room erupted, applause, shouting, demands for resignation. Karen stormed out without a word, but she didn't leave the game, because what she did next would change everything. You'd think after being publicly embarrassed at her own meeting, Karen Worthington would lay low. You'd think after 100+ neighbors called her out on fake citations, illegal surveillance, and HOA abuse, she'd back off. But people like Karen don't back off. They dig deeper. Because the moment they lose control, they don't shrink, they retaliate. And she did, with force. It was a Tuesday, cloudy skies, the kind that made everything feel heavier. I was mid-call with a DOJ contact when I saw them roll in, 3 black SUVs, unmarked, no plates, they didn't park. They stopped, one at the edge of my driveway, another by the community park entrance, and the last one directly in front of my neighbor's lawn facing my home. I ended the call, walked to the porch, and waited. The doors opened all at once. 6 men stepped out, not uniformed officers. Not city reps, private, polos, tactical pants, earbuds, radio clips, the whole look. Except none of it was real, no agency patches, no ID tags, just attitude. One of them approached, hands behind his back, eyes hidden behind shades too dark for a cloudy day. "Mr. Moore," he said. "We need to speak with you." "Badge," I said calmly. He didn't move. I repeated, "Show me a badge or leave my property." "We're not law enforcement," he admitted. "We're compliance contractors. Community-level enforcement personnel under direction of the Brookhaven Trace Executive Council." Brookhaven Trace didn't have an executive council. They had Karen, and now she had muscle. I looked past him. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms folded. She didn't smirk, didn't blink. She was letting the men do the talking now. But what she didn't realize is this: I was recording, high-res body cam, mounted discreetly on my porch frame, the audio crystal clear. "Sir," the contractor continued, "you've been designated as a high-risk resident based on behavioral reports submitted to the HOA board." I raised an eyebrow. "High risk," he nodded, "uncooperative, potentially armed, combative. Our job is to monitor and report." To who? The enforcement committee. There it was, Karen's new stunt. She couldn't win the vote, so she created a shadow group. No titles, no names, just uniforms and intimidation. And now they weren't just patrolling, they were embedding. That afternoon I walked the block. And that's when I saw them again. 2 of the fake officers, sitting inside a black SUV by the dog park, logging something into a tablet. Later that night, I found out what it was. A resident behavior score. They were rating people. One neighbor, Marla, a single mom of 3, had received a 7/10 compliance score and a written recommendation for property reevaluation. Another guy, David, ex-Navy, quiet guy, was flagged as borderline disruptive. They weren't just scaring people anymore, they were cataloging them, organizing who stayed and who got pushed out. But the worst was what they filed on me. I got a copy through an anonymous tip, a 5-page behavioral risk report marked confidential. Inside, photos of me mowing the lawn in tactical boots. Screenshots of my social media, which I hadn't updated in a year. A breakdown of every package I'd received in the last 30 days. Even notes about my sister when she visited from out of town. The final line: subject appears trained, possibly dangerous, recommend escalation. I'd seen these kinds of profiles before, in war zones, in foreign infiltration cases, but never in a suburban HOA. Karen had created a domestic targeting unit, and it wasn't just insane, it was illegal, so I called a meeting, but not the kind with folding chairs and name tags. This was off-grid, private garage, 8 residents, all of them targeted. We sat in folding chairs, lights off, phones in Faraday pouches, paranoia, no security. because if Karen was tracking people now, we weren't going to let her hear what came next. I laid it out. The fake patrol, the subs, the behavioral scoring system, and the confidential escalation file on me. At first, the room went silent. Then James, retired engineer, leaned forward and said, "So what do we do?" I looked around. Then I gave them my answer. We go higher. 2 days later, the neighborhood woke up to something different. Not a fine, not a flyer, a news crew, local channel. Microphone out, camera rolling. They were interviewing a resident outside her home, Marla. She was crying, not performative. Real. She talked about the compliance score she found taped to her trash can, how her son had been followed walking home from school, how one of Karen's enforcers told her she might want to consider relocation. That interview aired at 6:30 p.m. By 9 o'clock, it had 74,000 views. And Karen? She exploded. At 10:12 p.m., someone egged Marla's house. Her car mirror was snapped off. Then someone dumped a trash bag on David's lawn. Not teenagers. Strategic retaliation. To scare, to punish, to warn. And when I walked outside to grab my mail, there was something waiting for me too. A plain envelope. Inside, a photo of my garage zoomed in, taped across the top. We see everything. And that's when I made the call. Agent Dunham answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. The next day, Karen scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, claimed it was about restoring peace and community confidence. But when residents showed up, there were new rules: mandatory check-in, ID verification, phones off, private security at the door. This wasn't a meeting. This was a screening process, and halfway through she dropped the bomb. "We're introducing a community loyalty program," she said. "Residents who participate will receive enforcement leniency, neighborhood perks, and access to premium HOA services. Translation: obey or get out." She called it safety. I called it a quiet purge, but she never got to finish. Because 5 minutes later, the room lit up in red and blue, unmarked vehicles, real ones, federal ones, badges out, vests on, no warnings, no clipboard, just one voice. Karen Worthington, step forward. "You're under federal investigation for impersonation of authority, civil rights violations, and coordinated surveillance of private citizens." She froze, then looked at me. I stood quietly in the back, didn't smile, didn't nod. I just watched her fall. Because no matter how big someone thinks they are in a neighborhood, they forget who's watching. And what happens when the real enforcers come home? They cuffed her right there. Karen Worthington, HOA president, queen of paper fines and phantom patrols. And yet she didn't scream, didn't plead, didn't even flinch. She walked out of that clubhouse like she still had the keys to the kingdom. And as the feds loaded her into the back of the vehicle, I knew one thing for certain: Karen wasn't the architect. She was a soldier. A loud, manipulative, power-hungry soldier, but a soldier nonetheless. Because right before they closed the door, she looked me in the eye and whispered something I'll never forget. "It's bigger than you think." That's when it all clicked. This wasn't about one HOA. It wasn't about lawn codes or fence heights. This was part of a structure, a framework that had been quietly grooming community control models across the state. Karen, she was just bold enough to get caught. The real players, they were still in the shadows. That night, I stayed up and went through every piece of footage again. The behavior score sheets, the unmarked subs, the enforcement council emails. And then I noticed something I'd missed: a seal, in the corner of an old PDF Karen had shared in one of the internal HOA memos. Most people would have ignored it, but to someone who'd worked counterintelligence for 17 years, that seal didn't belong to any city department. It belonged to a private firm called Oak Sentinel Solutions. I'd heard the name before. Once. They'd bid on a government contract to manage remote surveillance integration for gated communities. They lost. But clearly, they'd found another path, one with less oversight and more control. I ran a quiet background on them. No website, no LinkedIn page, registered in Delaware. No listed executives, but one name came up buried in the filings: Wesleyan Pike, former Department of Civil Infrastructure, Black Site Logistics. A handler, not a public face. He was good, slippery, but his mistake: he left a paper trail. And it led straight back to 3 other HOAs in neighboring counties, each with a Karen, each with a surge of private patrols, each with at least one resident who'd quietly moved away after filing complaints. None of them spoke publicly, because they were scared, but I wasn't. At 6:40 a.m. The next morning I walked out to find my mailbox hanging open. No mail, just one thing inside, a flash drive. No label, no note, just raw plastic. I brought it inside, ran it through a sandbox system. It contained one video file, security cam footage, grainy, black and white. Karen talking to a man in a suit, Wesleyan Pike. She handed him a folder. He nodded once, then handed her what looked like a credit card reader. He mouthed one word, track. Then they both walked away. The date stamped 2 weeks before Karen created the fake enforcement council. So now I had what I needed. Proof she was working with an outside firm. Proof surveillance equipment had been distributed under the table. Proof this was bigger than an HOA ego trip. I uploaded everything to a secure DOJ portal, marked Tier 1 priority. Internal subversion threat. Then I texted Dunham, me, confirmed outside contractor. Intel passed to OIG, Dunham. Knew it. Sit tight, something's moving. Something was. Because 72 hours after Karen's arrest, the new HOA board called a meeting, not just with residents, with media, and with a legal rep. They were panicking. The clubhouse was quiet when I entered. No smiles, no greetings, just sweaty brows and stiff posture. A young guy stood up front, Tyler Maddox, interim HOA president, fresh haircut, shaking hands. He cleared his throat and said, "We want to clarify that the actions of the previous board were not sanctioned by the greater HOA charter, nor reflective of our values." Then the lawyer stepped up, and that's when things went from awkward to outrageous. Any resident found recording enforcement personnel without consent may be subject to civil penalties under section. I stood, didn't say a word, just raised my hand. The lawyer paused. "You have a question, sir?" "No," I said. "I have an announcement." He frowned. I walked to the front, placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside, photos of Wesleyan Pike timeline of Karen's meetings. List of surveillance hardware purchased by Oak Sentinel under fake business aliases, receipts from HOA discretionary funds used to pay them. I looked directly at the crowd and said, Karen wasn't working alone. And she wasn't working for this community. Gasps, whispers, one board member stood up. "This is highly irregular." "No," I cut in. "You know what's irregular? A private intelligence contractor infiltrating neighborhood associations under the guise of safety." Dead silence. Then a neighbor, Linda, retired teacher, spoke up. She tried to find me for my daughter visiting twice in 1 week, said it was pattern intrusion. I thought it was just Karen being cruel, but now I see. Another woman followed. She told me to remove my culturally aggressive door wreath. I thought I was crazy. The room started connecting the dots. Karen's attacks hadn't been random. They'd been tactical, scripted, targeted, and funded. I walked out before the chaos could peak, because by then, it wasn't about convincing them, it was about preparing them. Because Oak Sentinel wasn't going to vanish, and they didn't. That night I received a private message, encrypted, from a burner server I hadn't seen in years. Inside, a text block that read, "This operation was never about Brookhaven. It was a live test. We've logged your behavior, agent. You'll hear from us soon." And under it, a single line of code. I ran it through a tracker. It pinged from 6 different servers before going dark. Whoever sent that wasn't a neighbor, they were something else. They had reach, and they had a list, so I prepared my own. A list of every HOA-linked case tied to Oak Sentinel over the last 5 years. I worked through the night, called in favors, pulled decommissioned reports from private forums, and by 4 a.m., I had the names of 12 communities, each with a Karen, each with an enforcement team. Each with one common thread, a quiet expulsion of non-compliant residents, people who spoke out, people who were different, people who asked questions, and now people like me. The next morning I found a letter taped to my door. No envelope, no HOA logo. Just one sentence, "It ends with you or it spreads." It was handwritten, but the paper was printed with the Oak Sentinel watermark. That was their last mistake, because now I wasn't just responding, I was coming for them. What do you do when a neighborhood conspiracy explodes into a national threat? What do you do when a shady HOA turns out to be a sandbox test for real-world psychological warfare, funded by private contractors, masked as suburban policy? If you're me, you don't back down. You dig in. You gather proof, and then you burn them down, legally, permanently, Let me walk you through what happened after that letter showed up on my door, the one that said, "It ends with you or it spreads." I didn't call the cops, didn't panic. I reached out to an old friend, Jason Marin. Counter intel, sharp as broken glass, he picked up on the first ring. "You've been flagged," he said before I even spoke. "I figured," I told him. "They're watching me." "They're not just watching, they're recording, building case studies." "For what?" Jason paused. Then he said, "For future neighborhoods." Turns out Oak Sentinel wasn't just running a side hustle through Karen. They were testing obedience protocols. How far could residents be pushed before they cracked? Could fabricated authority override law if no one resisted? Would regular people comply if they thought their home depended on it? Karen's reign was just phase one, and I'd exposed it too early, but not without consequences, because now I was the anomaly. I didn't just resist, I fought back, I rallied the neighbors, I broke the system. And Oak Sentinel, they couldn't let that go. I flew out the next day to D.C. on a red eye. I didn't check luggage, didn't post it online. I moved quiet in D.C. I met with 3 people: a DOJ investigator, a private cybersecurity firm, and a whistleblower who used to contract for Oak Sentinel. What I saw next blew even my mind. They showed me footage, classified surveillance clips Oak Sentinel had used for training. It was Brookhaven Trace. My neighborhood, cameras I hadn't installed, angles that couldn't be captured legally, my backyard, my garage, me. They were collecting biometrics, the analyst told me. Eye dilation under stress, response times, how fast you moved toward a threat. You weren't just a problem. You were a subject. That was it. No more shadows. No more waiting. I filed a formal report with the FBI's Cyberterrorism and Civil Liberty Division. And I told them everything. The fake patrol, the HOA manipulation, the Oak Sentinel link, the threat letter, the surveillance. At first, they treated it like an anomaly, a weird one-off. But then I showed them the flash drive, the one with the Westland Pike footage, the behavior scores. The HOA training files labeled Community Control Simulation, Brookhaven Live Phase. That's when the room changed. Phones went dark, voices lowered. One of the agents said, "You realize this could go federal fast." I looked at him and said, "Good, because this isn't just about me anymore." Back home, things were quiet, too quiet. Karen was gone. But a few of the old patrol guys were still hanging around, playing it casual, jogging in loops, pretending to check their phones. They thought I wouldn't notice, they thought I was done. But I'd only just started. That weekend, I held an open-air meeting in the park, not secret, intentional. I invited every resident of Brookhaven Trace. Over 60 showed up, some confused, some scared, some angry. I stood on a bench and told them the truth. No sugarcoating, no conspiracy lingo, just facts. You were used. We were all used. As guinea pigs in a power experiment that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. I told them about the cameras, about the external funding, about the hidden connection to other communities. Then I asked, "How many of you got notices this year that felt personal?" Hands went up, half the crowd. Then I asked, "How many of you were followed?" More hands. And then, "How many of you felt like you couldn't speak up because no one would believe you?" Silence. But the weight of the moment spoke louder than words. I handed out pamphlets. I showed them the whistleblower documents. I even brought a lawyer to explain their rights. By the end, Brookhaven Trace wasn't scared anymore. They were furious. And fury, when pointed correctly, becomes momentum. The next morning, a class action lawsuit was filed against Oak Sentinel Solutions. 40 residents signed on. Karen's name was included, as was Westland Pike's, and suddenly, everything unraveled. The local paper ran a headline: HOA gone rogue. FBI tactical vet exposes suburban surveillance network. Then the TV crews came back. Then the New York Times picked it up. Then a U.S. senator called for a formal inquiry into HOA overreach and private enforcement contracting. And just like that, Brookhaven Trace became ground zero, not of a conspiracy, but of a reckoning. But Oak Sentinel didn't vanish quietly. They fought back, filed a defamation claim, tried to seal the files, issued public statements about disinformation and a rogue contractor who overstepped boundaries. But I was ready. I leaked everything to a journalist at ProPublica. Within days, a full exposé dropped, with proof, receipts, video, audio, documentation. And at the center of it all, Karen, Westland, and a jacket that read, FBI Tactical Unit. Because here's the truth, I didn't ask for this fight, but once it landed on my porch I made it my mission, because my badge doesn't make me powerful, what I do with it does. And I used it to protect what matters, not just my house, not just my street, my people, the families who thought they were alone, the ones who thought they were overreacting, the quiet ones, the weird ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who were just trying to live. Karen was sentenced to 18 months federal probation, 300 hours of community service, and a public apology to every family she targeted. Wesleyan Pike, he disappeared. Some say he's in Eastern Europe. Others say he was relocated. Doesn't matter. His network is broken. The pattern is exposed. And Oak Sentinel. They'll never operate quietly again. Today, Brookhaven Trace looks normal. No HOA patrols, no secret meetings, no whispered threats, just real neighbors and freshly cut grass. But I still wear the jacket, not because I need to flex, but because of what it says on the back. The thing Karen saw right before her empire cracked. FBI Tactical Unit. Because sometimes, just wearing the truth is enough to shake the lies. Drop your city in the comments. We're collecting the craziest HOA stories across the country. And who knows, your neighborhood might be next. If it is, just remember, not all heroes wear capes. Some of us wear jackets with warnings.